think what can make compression confusing for us guitar players is really understanding the features and what it can do for our rig. It's often the effect that we feel more than we hear, and if we don't really understand the features and the knob layout and the controls and how it can most benefit our rig, then we might not use it at all. A lot of players will think that compression is most associated with funk playing or country chicken picking. And all of those uses are valid, but when you really understand how to use a compressor, you can do some really cool things with it to dial in your rig in a way that you might not have considered. So I'm gonna walk you through all of these sort of typical controls you'll find on a compressor pedal. We're gonna make sure we understand what each and every knob and feature does. And we'll be using the 1176 from Universal Audio here as our sort of donor pedal, or our subject, if you will. This really mimics every feature from the classic 1176 rack style unit created by Bill Putnam in 1967. Like always, I'll drop links to the gear that we're using in the comments and in the description, so you can check that stuff out on your own in more detail. But for now, let's jump in, twist some knobs, and learn about compressors. So I got a little rig dialed up, and we're just gonna come out of this Sire S7 into the 1176 compressor, then into the Universal Audio Dream amp modeler. That's gonna give us the sound of a vintage Fender Deluxe from 1965. It's a nice sounding amp modeler. Nice clean Fender type of sound. Okay, so that's our bass tone that we're working with. Now, if I were to turn the compressor on, this input knob and output knob are like the places to start. And if I turn it on, it's gonna be a lot lower. So we wanna bring that input knob up. Now, what does that do? Well, imagine that there is this threshold line, right, that has to happen. And our guitar signal comes in and it's low. So the input knob brings it up. And as the input knob brings your guitar signal up, it starts to say, hey, we better start compressing. And that's what starts to happen. And the more that you turn that knob up, the more aggressive you will hear, or the more that the compressor wants to work and wants to push down on your tone. So in the middle, there's a nice place to start. Let me just play one chord for you. No compression, compression. So it's bringing everything to the forefront. And the output control is really important, because if you want to sort of get close to the sound you had with the pedal off, you need to adjust that knob. And you can hear it's grabbing the notes and bringing everything forward. And that is a tool that you might need at some point. Maybe you're playing. And you want those rhythm parts to be right in your face and not. And although they both sound good, the compressor makes them punch through the mix. Now I have that really squeezing to kind of, come across in a video, but we could dial that back. And you really barely notice it's on at that point. Let me adjust that a little bit more. Some of the classic compressor tones we hear, one of them, of course, everybody goes to Sultans of Swing. And that was a really clean guitar sound that needed sustain and needed to cut through the mix. And that's why Mark Knopfler would use the orange squeezer type of a compressor effect from years back, and it would bring those clean tones forward. And that's really, I think, for electric guitar, what the compressor is strong at. That's one of the many things we're going to talk about a lot more. So the input control basically tells the compressor to start turning on. You're bringing that guitar signal to a place where it wants to be compressed. And then the output control, you hear it often called makeup gain and that sort of thing. It's an overall adjustment to kind of make sure your compressor isn't too quiet or too loud. But that's the input and output controls. And we want to move on to some of these other features, because there's a lot to know that's under under the hood of a compressor like this. So the attack and release controls of a compressor like this are really important because it's basically telling the compressor when to do its job. With the input gain or input control, we brought the guitar signal up to a place where it can be compressed. Now the attack time is going to say start compressing. The release time says stop compressing and let me recover that note. Now both of these knobs are cranked up full clockwise. That means we're going to get the fastest attack and release times. And that was something that this circuit was really heralded as being the fastest on the market of recovery and attack time. And that holds true in this recreation in a pedal. So what that gives us is the onset happens really quickly of compression and then it lets it go. So it sounds kind of like this. So it grabs that note immediately. Now, I actually like to bring the attack back because I want a little bit more of the natural dynamics of the guitar to come through. When it's fast, it's going compress. When it's slower attack time, it's going come in guitar signal, now compress. So it lets it breathe a little bit. Now the attack time or the release time is saying compress, okay, done, compress, okay, done. As we turn that to a slower time, maybe we want to turn the compression up and let that compressor hang with some sustained notes. Let's get some more input gain. I hear it. So if I was playing a fingerstyle thing like that, I could let that compression hang out for a while. And those notes are just sitting there. It wouldn't last as long if I had the release time faster. It's hanging in there, but you can see from the light it lets it go. The faster the slower the release time, I can feel it and I can hear it. And you can see those lights are basically saying, oh, we're starting to release now. So it's important to kind of play with those. You know, a setting kind of like this might be good. We'll pull the input gain back a little bit for some standard use. A lot of people would like the 10 and 2 type of function on the old rack unit. That feels good. That feels natural to me. So those are really important. And if you don't want it to be super attacky, turn that attack control backwards and then play around with your release time if it feels like it's holding onto the note too long. Really, really important, and that's your attack and release for an 1176 style compressor like this one. The ratio control on this pedal mimics the old rack unit exactly, except that it had push buttons and not a knob for ratio. The push buttons had a 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 12-to-1, and 20-to-1 ratio that you could choose from. And we have that here on our knob. Now, what that means is ultimately just severity of compression. You know, you get more severe compression as you turn that ratio up. And for every, let's say, 4 dB that hits the threshold, 1 dB of audio passes through, like on our 4-to-1 setting, and that would be the same for 8, 12, or 20. 4-to-1 seems the most natural to me. I stick with that for the most part. I do have a healthy dose of compression happening, so when we do this, and then raise the ratio, it gets more kind of crazy in the compression realm. I can even hear the hissing. It's bringing up all the noise floor as well, but really, really squeezing down. And not making it as dynamic, giving it all in your face, but not as natural as you might expect. When it's that high, it's almost overwhelming. But Engineers would like it in the studio for drums or even a vocal or a bass. Keyboards can be compressed through 1176 and sound really good. So UA doesn't want to leave anything out. So even though I might live on 4:1, they want to make sure everybody else has all those ratios as well. But that's your ratio. Basically, the more you turn it up, the more severe the compression gets. You get compression on, attack and release, and then how severe it is with the ratio knob. That's pretty much it. So if I take this ratio control and actually turn it to off, it does something pretty cool. It actually removes compression from the circuit entirely, but it leaves you with all the natural color and flavor of the original 1176 circuit. Engineers would really like that, just to add some more personality to the signal that they're putting into it. So I have the pedal off. Let's just hear it without the pedal engaged. I'll turn it on. It's subtle, and I'm not going to try to sell you snake oil and say it makes everything better, but when this is off, it feels a little less natural to me. This is kind of almost acting like a buffer and bringing some new frequencies to the front. Very subtle, but it's a feature that they added, which I think is pretty cool. Another thing that engineers would like to do was they would take those ratio buttons and kind of jam them all in, and it would really create the most aggressive compression and even some overdrive from the box. You'd actually distort the unit itself. So we turn this knob all the way to all. We're gonna play something here. And it really squeezes the bejesus out of the tone. And even adds a little grit. So, Universal Audio doesn't like to leave, a stone unturned. They say they model stuff, warts and all. That was something that was a trick that engineers would do. If you put maybe a humbucker guitar into that, you'd probably drive this even harder to get some actual grit happening from the compressor itself. So that's something that they snuck in on the ratio control. Pretty cool if you're a real compressor nerd. A lot of the examples we were showing were pretty extreme on the compression side, just so you could really hear it and get a sense of it through the video. But you can dial up a compressor to kind of be like a nice always on pedal that really doesn't compress too much or so little that you'll barely notice it, but it kind of will even things out, particularly with single coil guitars where there might be a little imbalance between the lows being too punchy and the highs not being sort of present enough. So without the pedal on, you might get something like this. Turn it on. And you can see that light is barely flickering. That means there's barely any compression happening. Even when I dig in hard, it doesn't really engage the compressor all that much, but it still feels good. Although that sounds good to me, I'm digging for the notes a little bit harder than I would with the compressor on. So take a look at those settings. If you have a pedal like this, give those a try and leave it on and see what happens. It could really work out for you. Okay, so now imagine that this Dream 65 pedal is an old deluxe that's clean, but we want to drive it hard, almost with a clean boost. Now, what happens with amplifiers is as you turn them up and they distort, there's a natural compression that happens. And compression also happens in our overdrive pedals. And you can treat an 1176 kind of like, a clean boost / overdrive pedal by cranking the output and hitting the front end of your amp. And the fact that it's got compression in it, it means that you're not only going to get the overdrive, but you're going to get some sustain as well. So if you just hear it clean with the bridge humbucker, kick the pedal on, watch this. So all that's doing is hitting the front of this pedal hard and giving me sort of natural amp distortion. Some of those classic sounds that we like are coming from the amp, and we can hit it with the compressor and get it to boost, get it to overdrive, and get it to compress as well. So very similar settings like we had before, but I just crank the output gain and smack in the front of that amp pedal to give me that result. So there you go, try that too. Now when it comes to using a compressor for funky guitar playing, well, I've talked to a few different players that really live in that genre, and some are into it and some aren't. So let's talk about how to use just a little bit of compression to make our funk playing stick out in the mix. And I think the reason why it's kind of synonymous with it is because in funk rhythm guitar playing, you have chords and you have single notes, and they're often in the same song and part. So if you want to even those out, a compressor is a nice way to do it. But you know, we're pretty subtle here. We're not using too much compression. We're really letting the note come through, and we're releasing it really fast. So if we're doing something like this, so even when I'm playing those quiet single notes, they're still nice and strong, not overly loud, but they're punchy and right there. So there's like a little sonic saran wrapped on it. Or cling film for those of you in the UK. It's kind of smoothing everything out. You might have even heard a little volume jump when I turned it off. Maybe not so much, but that all comes with the output control. And I could turn that attack down a little more, because we want those natural pick dynamics to come through. It's a balancing act with a compressor, but these are some good starting points for you to literally get started. The reason I think compressors and country guitar really went hand in hand for a number of years was because in the 70s and the 80s, when players were using, Tele-style guitars with really loud, clean amps, they wanted that compression and that sustain, but they weren't getting it from overdrive sound, so they needed to get it from a compressor, which is why you saw a lot of them being used back in those days. Nowadays, it's so rock-driven that you don't see as many compressors on boards like you might have in the earlier days of country guitar playing. Now, so what does that do for us? Well, we want those clean tones, and we want this compressor to help us hold on to that note a little bit more. And like I did with the funk players, I can ask country players, hey, do you like compression? Do you use it? And it'll be pretty split. Some folks will be like, yeah, I have one on my board and I use it as a necessary tool. Other country players say, no, I just turn my amp up and it works great for me. So you're going to have differing opinions on whether to use compression for country or not. But if we take a basic clean tone, we do something like that, add the compressor. It's making those notes even, but it's not choking them too much. That's what I like about something that has more adjustability on it than, like, say, a Dynacomp would, for instance. I can turn it up a little bit more, give us a little bit more compression. And you can hear when it really held it. It should feel natural, and that's a nice setting, sort of that 10 and 2 on the attack and release, and then you can adjust your control from there. And I have the output cranked, and it's sounding really good. But that's a good example. Screenshot that, replay the video if you have a compressor like this, and you can dial in some tones for your chicken picking. Universal Audio decided to add a couple extra features on the top of this pedal that I want to go over because they're important. One is a buffer switch. So you can have this pedal run in a buffered mode or in true bypass. And that's important because if you were to put this before a fuzz and you had it in buffer mode, that's not going to work well with the fuzz. Fuzz pedals don't like buffers before them, and if you have a bunch of buffers on your board already, you can just turn it off and then you'll be in true bypass mode with that switch. Now, there's also a parallel switch here too, so you can run parallel compression. Essentially, you can have the compressed signal and your dry guitar signal running in parallel, and they come out of the jack, and then you're kind of hearing both and feeling both, and that's a cool option that they make available in this particular compressor pedal. I almost left out a really important switch on the pedal, and I had to come back and shoot it, hence the costume change. There's a switch on the middle of this particular pedal where it says single, dual, and sustain. Now, single means that we're just using one 1176 style compressor to get our compression. Dual means that we're actually using two chained together, a la Jimmy Page. He did that in the studio for creating the tones for Black Dog, where we're doing that all buttons in function on one of the compressors and really hitting it with another one to almost make it work like a pedal in front of an amp. It's a really unique sound. Go back and listen to the track, and that's what you're hearing. Two of these compressors strung together. The sustain function on the pedal is a tribute to Lowell George from Little Feat. Lowell would also use two 1176 style compressors, one that had more of the fast release, fast attack. The other one would be slower, so it would really hang on to his slide stuff and really make it sit in the mix well. So you got a lot of options just with that switch to kind of compress your brains out. Well, that was about as deep of a dive as I've ever done on compressors. I hope I answered some questions for you. And go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know what you're using for compression, if you are at all, what products you like. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in there. I'll try to answer some. Our viewers like that stuff too because, you know, it helps them make decisions on getting a product to put into their rig as well. And when you get a compressor of your own, come on back, watch the video, go through the controls with me once again. Hopefully it'll really make sense when you incorporate it into your rig. But until then, stay safe, keep playing. I'll see you.